Again, for anybody that just joined, I just want to thank everybody for coming together today. And just, it's a difficult time. And I felt like I really wanted to honor Pat and let us all get a chance to at least kind of be together, at least if it's even virtually is good right now. So what we're going to do is we'll talk about, I'll give you a little background on Pat, and then we have some speakers. We have several speakers that are going to say a few words, and then we're going to do a toast, and then we're going to conclude with a little slideshow that I put together with the help of everyone. Hey, Mark, I think that you have an echo in the back. All right, I'll keep rolling. There's an echo back there somewhere, but I'm just going to try to talk over it. So bear with me, and thanks again, everybody. So I want to start just by kind of telling a little bit of background on Pat and some things that maybe not everybody knew about him and kind of how he got started with things. And a big dog is very loud. So before I do that, I did want to take just a minute, just 1 minute for everybody. And if you'd like to say a prayer or have a thought, we'll just do that at this moment. All right. So Pat was born on November 28th, 1964 in Park Falls, Wisconsin. He was the youngest of 6 children of Rennie and Judy. And when he was 2, the family picked up and they moved to Missoula. And if anybody spent any time around Pat, you always heard about Missoula for sure. He ended up spending a lot of time with his dad with Little League. His dad was big into Little League. So Pat ended up playing baseball and also football in high school. And then, Mark, somebody just messaged me. There's no audio on YouTube.
We're good now.
Okay. All right. Hopefully that's fixed for everybody. So Pat started going to college in Missoula and ended up having some girl troubles. So he decided to move to Portland to live with his sister, Colleen. Once he was in Portland, he ended up getting into cycling and okay. He ended up getting into cycling and started with being a bike messenger. Ended up doing that for quite a few years and getting through school, working through school as a bike messenger. So I don't know if a lot of people heard that about him, but as he's gotten fitter over the last year or so, a lot of the bike messenger stories came out. And if you follow Pat on YouTube, if you follow Pat on YouTube, he posted a great story about his experiences being a bike messenger. So I encourage everybody to look at that. It's pretty fun, and it's a good look at Pat. And things he did growing up. So Pat, as he went through school, he got interested in journalism. And when in talking to his sisters, he always really enjoyed writing. So it seemed like a natural progression through school and his professors to turn that into a career. I think this is here. So Pat ended up journalism in college, and then kept up with his cycling, doing the local bike racing, and ended up being able to combine the two of these things. And one of the things I talked to his sisters about was his work ethic and his work ethic and just his dedication and his passion for cycling, which never faded. No matter what, it never faded. He lived cycling 24/7. And then his writing. Somehow he was lucky enough to combine the two and do the two things that he was most passionate about. And he brought that work ethic that was part of the family, part of his growing up, what his parents had ingrained in him. He brought that to his writing, the traveling, and made him into the person that we all knew and loved. So I'm gonna start out Daniel Benson. We're gonna have Daniel Benson from Cycling News speak, and we're fortunate enough to work. Pat and I were fortunate enough to work for Cycling News for many years with a great crew, and you know that cycling community is a very tight community, and especially us that work on the media side of things. And Daniel is one of those guys that we don't get to see a lot in the U.S., but he's been very important for Pat's career, helping him, encouraging him, and along with his other co-workers. So I wanted to have Daniel say a few words about having Pat at Cycling News. Daniel?
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Do you want to go on mute and then I'll...
Yes.
Also? Cool. Thank you. Okay. Hi. For those that don't know me, I'm Daniel, and I'm the editor at Cycling News. I'd like to start off by saying how privileged and honoured I am to speak at Pat's memorial. In truth, I feel like a bit of a fraud. Many of you knew Pat for longer than I did. Many of you had stronger bonds and friendships with him, and most of you probably saw Pat more recently. But one element that we can all share is how lucky enough we were to know and spend time with Pat. No matter how fleeting, no matter how short, we can all testify to the lasting impression he made on us. Pat joined the Cycling News team, first as a contributor and then as a full-time member of staff in 2014. Before we'd even spoken, I was well aware of Pat's pedigree as a writer and his standing as a journalist. I knew how well respected he was among his peers and that he had immense talent as a journalist. To be honest, I was slightly in awe of the guy at first. He seemed to have a contact for everyone in the sport, and the depth of his knowledge was second to none. But Pat operated without ego or arrogance. He was down to earth and always welcoming of new ideas and new faces. He was the perfect teammate. When I recall the times I shared with Pat, I think about the Richmond World Championships in 2015. During that week in the US, he showed me the lay of the land, introduced me to a sea of people I'd never met on the American scene, and he often diffused the naturally stressful environment of the press room with his dry humour and quick wit. We shared beers with Casey and Jono, talked racing with Laura and Kirsten, and that week in Richmond will always bring back good memories for me. I also remember another side of Pat the journalist, who wasn't afraid to ask the tough questions, who worked with integrity and honesty, and was a beacon for independent and impartial journalism. I can remember waking up in the early hours of the UK to text messages from Bradley Wiggins and a horde of ruffled press officers at the Tour of California. When my phone started pinging, I knew that it was because Pat was doing his job and holding people to account. Above all, though, Pat was a great storyteller. It stemmed from his personality and his strong upbringing. He was always fair and just, never treating the stars of the sport any differently to the unproven juniors. And I think that was partly why he was so liked by so many. When he interviewed you, it was because he cared. And when he asked questions and told your story, his love for the sport shone through. It meant that you could quickly spot Pat's work from a mile away. In an age where sensationalism is often encouraged and all too often applauded, Pat provided a timely reminder of how things should be. It's far too early to even think about how the cycling news team moved forward without Pat by our side. And in truth, there's no way that we can ever replace him. However, I know, and so do those that work closely with him, Laura, Kirsten, Patrick, Daniel, Stephen, Barry, Ellis, Sai, and Zeb, that Pat will never be far from our thoughts. He taught us lessons in humility and trust, how to be better writers, and how to show patience and fortitude, and how to bring balance and honesty into our everyday lives. Pat may have left us, but his legacy will live on through cycling news for many, many years. In time, when I remember Pat, I'll cherish his work, but most importantly, I'll think of his character and the lasting impressions he made. I'll think about the sunsets he posted, the rides that he took, and I'll wish that I had one more chance to tell him how much he meant to us. On behalf of everyone at Cycling News and the cycling community as a whole, we'll miss you so much, Pat, but you'll never be forgotten.
Thanks, Daniel. So next, we're going to hear from Team Director Axel Merckx, who can show us a little bit of a different side of working with Pat. Axel?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Hi. Well, unfortunately, as the news came and we found out the major loss that I found out through Cycling News that Pat passed away. First of all, it was a huge shock, but a big sorrow also. Pat has meant a lot for us in the cycling community. He was fair, he was right, he was sometimes harsh maybe, but he was always right. And regardless of if he asks you the tough questions, deep down we do know that Pat was in love with cycling and cared very much for cycling. His knowledge about cycling in general, but domestic cycling in particular, was huge, and it will be very hard to be replaced. I remember meeting Pat for the first time as a freelancer, and then later on as a Cycling News writer, spending time with me in the car, and we spent a few stages together, whether it was in California or Tour of Utah. Pat was always dry humor, funny. I tried to feed him many times. He always refused to eat because he was neither hungry or thirsty, which always amazed me. But he was always positive. I know that he was also a huge fan, and I'm a little biased. He was a huge fan of development in general. He was not only a great rider, I consider him also. He was also a great role model, and he was teaching in a way my riders how to deal with reporters. He was a mentor to them. He was guiding him in how to address the press, and just like, unfortunately, Sean White, he left the imprint on our team. I think Pat will leave a huge void behind, and he's gone way too soon, as we all can agree on this. And he will be dearly missed, but for sure he will never be forgotten. And I would like to send my condolences to his family, all his friends, from the Action and Hagen's Vermont team, but from the cycling community in general. And somewhere, every time we go to a race, we will always look for Pat, but he will always be in our hearts. And may he rest in peace.
Thank you, Axel. Thanks so much. Next, we're going to hear from one of the Peloton's prominent riders, Brent Bookwalter.
Hey guys, thanks for the opportunity. I guess just speak about Pat a little bit on behalf of the riders, the cyclists who he definitely had a big impact on. The relationship between a cyclist and a journalist can be a really challenging dynamic. We as racers depend on the reporting, the storytelling, and the journalism to convey the excitement and drama from our races and lives. At the same time, what is often needed for an exciting story or article can be probing, intrusive on our weaknesses, personal lives, and shortcomings. Pat was a professional who was skilled at building this relationship with a rider and finding that balance between giving the sport and fans the honesty it deserves, with consideration for who a rider is as a person as much as what we do in a race. Pat loved the sport, he loved the races, and his authentic, calm smile as he approached for an interview was a sign that he was so much more than a fan reporter looking for a scoop. Pat asked intelligent questions, he did his homework before he spoke, and he could be relied on for conveying impactful stories as opposed to simply digging for flashy headline fluff. Pat was a guy who I trusted and always performed his job with the utmost integrity and responsibility. If I had a story I wanted to tell the cycling world or a perspective that I thought needed to be conveyed, Pat was the guy that I knew would do it with intelligence, respect, and passion. Pat raised the bar for what a cyclist expects from a journalist, and undoubtedly the future stories of pro cycling that are told will be positively impacted from the legacy Pat has left. As riders, we'll all miss seeing Pat at the races, but he will not be forgotten. Rest in peace, Pat.
Thanks, Brent. Lastly, we're going to go to Guillermo Rojas. Guillermo, are you there?
John, thanks for the opportunity. I look around and all the faces here, I feel like we all have memories of Pat at a race or just somewhere within the sport. And, I'm honored to call Pat a friend, and I'm honored to connect with all of you guys. And with that connection, Pat comes. I mean, Pat was, to me, over the years, I met Pat back in 2012 at Tour California. And to me, he was obviously more than a friend. He was a teacher to me. He was a mentor. He was also a critic. Pat wanted the truth, wanted to do so much for the sport. His passion for the sport was higher than so many people out there. And all of us here have a lot of love for the sport. I was trying to count all the different races where I either worked or saw Pat, and it's probably a lot less than all of you. There's probably 7 Tour Californias, about 7 Colorado races, and maybe 3 others, national championships, things like that. But my relationship with Pat was heavy on the phone. Like I said, Pat was my teacher, Pat was my mentor. And through all those conversations, either if I was working at Tour California or one of the races or working at USA Cycling, Pat demanded 2 things. He demanded trust and demanded the truth. And that's why when you read his articles and read his stories, you feel that, because his passion, he wanted to make sure that the truth came out. And obviously we all know him as a professional, as a friend, but as a professional, I felt like he set the bar high, and as a friend, he set it even higher. One thing I love about Pat, he had the rare ability to go back and forth, where he can have a conversation with you about something professional, something about the sport, but then switch over and dive into something personal and make sure that you're okay, and then all of a sudden be able to go back right to professional and back to friendship. Pat cared about every friend, rider, race director, team director. I mean, the size of his heart for this sport is tremendous. One of the last times I saw Pat was when he came here to Colorado Springs. He came to USA Cycling. He did a whole tour of USA Cycling. I took him around the OTC. But my favorite memory was probably a late night when Pat and I just sat around and talked. And you can tell in all those conversations, what I talked about before, the truth was one of the most important things to Pat. He really wanted to make sure that a story became a story if it could actually make a difference. And he wasn't afraid ever, and you guys all noticed, of searching for the truth and making sure that he demanded the truth from everyone. So, the way I'm going to remember Pat and my legacy is that his legacy, the way I look at him, is that he was that blue collar champion for all the blue collar heroes. He stood up for the little guy, made sure that fair was fair, and that he demanded that from everyone. So, John, I appreciate the time. And I know all of us are hurting. So, let's reach out to each other to support each other through this.
Thank you, Guillermo. I was gonna say a little bit more from the personal side, but I'm watching the timer we have on Zoom, and I don't want to run out of time. So what I would like to do is we'll have Sean Brett come up and please lead us in a toast.
Yeah. Again, with everybody else, I'm honored to call Pat a friend, my brother. You had to have two things to be Pat's friend, and that was sincerity and respect. And that was in all aspects. Sincerity in who you are and what you do. And Pat lived that, and he expected other people to live that as well. I came to cycling late. I came to cycling as a super fan, as all people do, I'm sure. And I didn't know Pat, but we were friends on Facebook, and we ended up being roommates. And I was sitting in the media room waiting for him to arrive, and a picture of my hotel room popped up on Facebook. And it said, I don't know who this guy is, but I'm sure I'm going to like him. And there was a great big bottle of Jameson sitting on the desk. And that's what he took the picture of. And he and I, over the years, as I explored bourbon, he explored bourbon as well. And so every time we went on tour, it was usually a different bottle of something. And Pat settled on Bullet Bourbon. And if you saw his quarantine pictures, you'll know that Pat grabbed a great big bottle and said, I'm set to be quarantined. So this toast is about Pat, and it's for everybody else. And so if you'll raise your glass, may you approach each day with a vim and vigor. Your days be filled with a passion, any passion, and may you serve others with the same integrity, generosity, and sarcasm as Pat did. Death leaves a heartache no one can heal. Love leaves a memory no one can steal. And in what Pat thought was his native tongue, na zdraví, which is Czech for cheers.
Thanks, Sean. So we're running out of time on the timer. So I want to thank everybody so much for coming together for this last minute. It's been a heck of a time trying to get everything put together. But we recorded this. We'll get it on YouTube. Everybody can see it. And what I would like to do is I'm going to attempt to share my screen and show you the slideshow that I've put together to conclude with.